evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we have a very special edition of Talkin TV. Now, many of you are probably wondering who in the world I am. Well, I am your esteemed host tonight, Ian Hamilton. And what today will feature is a very unique theme that our traditional hosts came up with. That's right, it's a Force Awakens debate. It will be a long, detailed mantra, if you will, where our two contestants will present their ideas either for or against the first installment in Disney's Star Wars franchise. Tonight's contest will be a one-on-one, mano-a-mano showdown to kick off the second Star Wars month of 2020. To do that, they brought in myself, a self-proclaimed Star Wars expert, to mediate a discussion that is surprisingly not as controversial as many would like it to be. So, in true Star Wars fashion, we end the first year since Disney's initial purchase of the brand, where the fan base and haters alike have not received a movie, with a debate that strikes at the heart chords of the many old and new fans alike. So, it is with great honor that I present to you the first Talkin TV debate. And without further ado, boys and girls, here are our contestants.
What up, people?
Damn, that was a fire intro.
Told
Ian.
you. I told you.
We got some people in the chat. What is going on, guys? Thank you for hanging out. Ian, thank you so much for doing this. Regardless of what happens, whatever blood is spilled, I just got to let you know right now that you made me just dang proud with that intro, my friend. That was incredible.
Look, all I know is I prepped my boy well, and I've come to defend The Force Awakens, and I'm not going to do the chewing bubblegum mantra because it's been way too overutilized, but let's just say that I'm all out of bubblegum. And Chris, you're going down, man. You're going down. I'm sorry. I've been with you on many wrong opinions that you've had, but this one, you're going down. That's all I got to say.
Fair enough. Well, before we jump into it, I would love to let people know why we're doing this in regards to what's going to be happening for us on Friday night, starting this weekend, if you could.
Yeah, we're recapping Mandalorian season 2 week by week on Fridays, and it's going to be a lot of fun. You're probably also going to see this guy here too. Yeah. In there, they're going to be on Fridays on our channel, Talkin TV at 7:30. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've got them very formalist and segmented, but
that's not the only thing. Follow the playlist. Go follow the playlist. All the videos are posted for you to pre-save and set a reminder to. And we hope to see you there. And of course, Monday nights, I'll be guesting on Basic Entertainment's channel as we do more Mandalorian rewatch. Because look, for as much SHIT as I love to talk about Star Wars, I'm addicted. Let's just be honest.
It's why you talk that much shit.
Yeah.
And we're already getting comments in the chat too. Certain Vid says, wow, this movie is overhyped. Ian, just so you know, I'm sorry that you had to put up with this amount of people already, and we barely even started yet. So, Ian, without further ado, you want to break down the rules?
Absolutely. And let me just give my opening remarks with gentlemen. I am extremely gracious and excited to be here. It's an awesome opportunity to talk about, potentially one of the most controversial movies of the 2010s. So again, let's get right into it. We're going to break down the rules for you guys. We're going to have 3 rounds tonight. Round 1 is going to be our intro round. So it's important to note here that there's no interruptions. It's going to be, your opening statements, kind of your opening stance, if you will. Now, round 2, that will bring us into kind of more so the debate round, the main entree, that juicy dish. This is where cohesive, well thought out points will be made. Interruptions can and will happen. That's another important side note to make here. Now, our final round will be the decisive round, I guess, is the most appropriate term here. Now, this is where both of our contestants, Chris and Dom, will be able to make any last points or remarks. No interruptions. We want these to be clear and concise, and again, well-rounded points. So no interruptions here. And our last big note here is that whoever will go first in our first round will go last in our third round. With that said, gentlemen, who would like to start off with our first opening statement?
Oh, I mean, I have a coin flip if you want to do it, but
classic coin flip.
Yeah,
let's do it. Yeah, share the screen so we can see it happen.
I didn't have it set up. I just had like a regular coin back there somewhere on my desk.
Go for it then.
Ready? I'll be right back. This is already off to a great start.
Oh man. Yeah. So guys, if you're here, Brando Critic, our good friend here on YouTube, just sent us a box of Canadian delicacies, which we posted our first ever unboxing video. Dude, it was wild. We had like ketchup chips in there and all dressed chips. I was more on the chip side, but there's plenty of candies. Go check that video out. We just posted it, and Dom is back with the coin just in time.
I have
Dom,
the X coin because I didn't have an actual coin. So
oh,
we're gonna
okay.
do
So
the
what are the
best.
sides on that?
X is heads and the IMAX side is tails. So I don't know if y'all can see it. So
It don't matter to me. Whatever you want.
Call it heads or tails. No, I'm saying you call it.
I'll go for the X.
All right. So heads. Tails. I go first. All right. I dropped it. Screw it. Cool. All right. So I'm going first. Wow, this is funny. My stance. I mean, this shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone, but this movie's fucking great. I don't know what people are talking about. I'm blaming that largely on the fact that Disney has mostly manipulated and warped people's view of Star Wars, and understandably so, because most of the rest of the movies that came out after this movie were crap. This movie is not great. So before we start, I just want everyone to think back to a simpler time, pre-COVID, pre-all this nonsense that we have now, to a small year called 2014, which in my opinion was the absolute best year for movies of this past decade. Great year. Most of us were still on YouTube. We were still in high school. We were worrying about what college we were going to. You know, life was good. Life was simple. Before the internet really set in and before it began to consume media, back when there was some semblance of normalcy, obviously the big movie news, George Lucas was selling Lucasfilm to Disney in a record-breaking $2.2 billion. Obviously, this kind of was a little bit weird to people because the last movie that had come out theatrically was Revenge of the Sith. And needless to say, the 3 prequel movies, they garnered the reception that they did. And the news was also out, obviously, that they were planning on continuing Lucas's original vision of finishing up the Skywalker saga by crafting 3 sequels to the original trilogy that would serve to introduce a whole new generation to Star Wars. And then the first Force Awakens teaser hits. Thanksgiving. A few snapshots of all the new characters followed by some somber voiceover, and then boom, the Millennium Falcon. Millennium Falcon blasts onto the screen. The epic, iconic John Williams score blasting. This teaser proved one thing, and it was that Star Wars was back, and it was going to be bigger than ever. The problem, obviously, within the last 4 years is that the Walt Disney Corporation, like I said above, has not only not kept their word when it came to staying true to Lucas's original vision, but also shamelessly playing its fan base for saps by giving them pretentious tech pieces of derivative garbage covered up by spectacle and true visual mastery, so coded and installed that it makes Stranger Things look downright original. But despite all the muck, all the garbage that the Walt Disney and J.J. Abrams has made us sit through, I will still attest that Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, is not only a good movie, but a great movie, and despite what followed, the kickoff that this new trilogy deserved.
All right, fantastic opening point here from our starting contestant, Dom. Chris, how would you like to follow up with that?
Yeah, so, I mean, he kind of made my point there a little bit in regards to it, so I guess I'll just further elaborate. See, I was excited is an understatement. I was chumming at the bit to see this movie. The second it got announced, I know Dom and I didn't quite hang out at that point in time, but I was just such a music guy, such a one-note creator. And when this movie came out, it's like my whole world was flip-flopped. Like instead of, coming home and listening to albums like I would just consume Star Wars again in preparation. I probably rewatched the original movies 3-4 times before going to see this film. And I'm really glad I did that before I went and saw this film, because after I saw this film, and after the initial adrenaline rush of getting a new Star Wars film and something that, sure, I had Star Wars films in my lifetime, but those were the prequels, and I was so young that the memory of going to see them in the theaters, although it did happen, is a bit hazy, just because life goes on, you get new memories, and when you're that little, again, it's bits and pieces, right? I can remember the day. I can remember the feeling of waiting online and just having hope. And then I can remember leaving that theater and instantly having the hope ripped away from me and having to hide from my friends that this was not a fun night, that this was not a well-spent night, because literally what I saw was just A New Hope, drag and dropped, insert, female lead instead of, scared little boy on Tatooine, insert, Darth Vader, who's a little more whiny and emo because, hey, My Chemical Romance came out and they were huge like 10 years ago. So we have to hit that audience now. And I just saw a bunch of these template drag and drop things, and I instantly knew it was happening. Disney had happened, and not the way that I had wanted. They ruined superheroes, and now they were going to ruin Star Wars. And like an idiot, I stayed around for, 4 more movies of abuse? And we're covering The Mandalorian, so have I learned my lesson? I don't know if I have, but one thing I do know is that I have a lot of points tonight to make, and a lot of them are going to be open-minded, because if you have eyes and you have ears and you just understand storytelling at all, you can clearly see when a template is just being drag and dropped into again. So.
Okay. Well, folks, you've heard it here. Both of our contestants are fired up. Seems like they've brought a lot of ammunition here tonight. So you know what? Let's not waste any time. Let's go right into it. Dom, I'm going to have you start us off round 2.
Right.
This is going to be your debate round. This is going to be your major points, your explanations, your examples, anything that you feel is noteworthy to bring to the table. And the floor is yours.
All right, Chris, I'm sorry. You know how much I am on board with you for the Disney bashing, but I'm telling you, I've said this before, you're letting your Disney hatred of Disney, and understandably so, specifically within this franchise, they have mired a lot of just negative feelings, just in general. But I'm telling you, you're wrong on this one. And as far as the copying template goes, you've used that example so many different times that honestly, I'm bored to death of it. I really am. I get it. You think that it's just a New Hope over and over again, despite the fact that there are new types of characters in there, as opposed to what you said before, as opposed to the fact that, most of our favorite movies are ripoffs. I'm the biggest Quentin Tarantino fan. How many times has Quentin Tarantino ripped off other things from different movies before? Like, it's not a new idea.
I think homage and ripping something off are two completely different things.
Right, but the difference being here is that this is not a case of just ripping something off as far as like remaking a movie. It's certainly borrowing a lot of elements, a lot of familiar elements, and understandably so, because it's the biggest franchise in the world, and Disney obviously wants to make their money back as far as the investment that they made went. And as far as that went, just as far as the direction that they chose to take, at least for that first movie, yeah, it was a smart play. The movie made what? Let me pull up the box office here. The movie made what was that?
2.8 billion?
Oh, it's 6-8 billion. Exactly. It was like what, the highest grossing movie of all time for what was it? It was up there
until
as far as
Endgame,
the highest
I think, something like that. Yeah,
until
it certainly
Endgame,
did its thing.
So as far as doing that, it goes. But again, we're not here to talk about like box office gross as far as like subjective movie taste goes. That's a whole different story. But I think the reason to me why I go with this movie and why I'm always willing to fight this movie's fight, as opposed to the numerous criticisms that I've heard lobby towards this movie, as opposed to The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, which again, rightfully so, but those movies' failures to me don't reflect poorly on this movie. It reflects poorly on the company, not on this movie in and of itself. But the thing to me that I guess will keep me coming back to this movie over and over again, because obviously that's the power of Star Wars, right? Star Wars is something that you can go back to and watch over and over and over again and have it feel familiar, right? It's part of the reason why the original trilogy is so iconic. It's part of the reason why, weirdly enough, the prequel trilogy is iconic to our generation specifically, because we grew up with that. So even though, sure, quality-wise, it doesn't necessarily hold up, there are still things that we can go back to that we can enjoy about this movie, those movies. And as far as this movie goes, this was the first movie that I'd seen in a while where I was like, okay, this movie generates a feeling from me. And as you said before, 2015 was the year of soft reboots. That was the same year we got Jurassic World and Creed. And I think the difference is that this was the only movie that actually was able to kind of reuse said previous feelings, but actually have a purpose to it, which is really something that I can't say about any of those other movies as far as that goes. Jurassic World is just that one I will say is a shameless ripoff of the original. And Creed, again, Stallone's been making these movies so long, he knows how to make them. And as far as getting a director who actually knows how to have like a unique take on the Rocky story, yeah, Creed's awesome and it feels modern, but it's still the same story. So,
yeah, I don't know. I think you should use the same argument if it's something that's been ignored by the general populace when it holds true. And so it's just kind of like,
but if it's only subjective to you, then that doesn't
I don't know. I mean, I can point to a bunch of people in the chat right now. For example, New Hope 2.0, just to pull up one real quick. Force Awakens is overhyped.
Internet go-to. It's an easy internet go-to answer. That is such an easy, like one of those like one note. How do you describe this movie? Oh, it's a New Hope 2.0. It's like, that's easy. Like, come up with something new.
Right, and that's the most upsetting part about this, is a corporation with as many resources as Disney has, the ability pretty much for anyone, you ask anyone to work on this movie, they're not going to turn it down unless they're so auteur or something that it's beneath them, and then they're just going to miss out on all those dollars. It's pretty upsetting that this is what we got, because, like, I wanted to start off with talking about the character of Rey, who, I'll give it to you, when you first meet her, she's extremely interesting. She comes with a whole new set of problems that we really have not explored in the way that Star Wars has done before. I mean,
Agreed.
First of all, Star Wars giving us like something refreshing in the sense of like the strong female protagonist who's force sensitive out there alone in the world, already a harsh galaxy to begin with, and then putting that element on top of it. Like I've respected them for opening it up to a whole new audience and trying to like, expand their audience, right? You talk about ROI in business school, return on investment. And I think being like less of a boys club bodes well for Star Wars. And I think it actually offered more depth and, at least in the first act of this film, more relatability to the character, because you can kind of really feel for her and her struggle and being abandoned and the orphan. It was a very strong hook, but quickly, when they introduced this ensemble, when they introduced this ensemble cast, though, she kind of gets pushed to the side and is really just there to service a quick BB-8 one-liner, whether it be a lighter flick out of his chest or some stupid high-pitched beep noise. It's just so upsetting to see that they could hook you in and actually for once make you feel like that $14-15 you paid for a blockbuster was worth it. And then quickly you're just like, oh, okay. So now it's really about Finn. But then 15 minutes later, you're like, oh, it's about Poe. And somehow along the line, the plot is getting kicked down the street like a can, just going left, right, never really going straight and at a consistent pace. And it's just, it gets over flooded. It gets confused. The characters step on one another. It almost seems like when you have a group of all-stars playing, for example, let's use the U.S. Olympics basketball team, right? That's all of our best players. The U.S. basketball team always wins in the Olympics because the majority of basketball players are from the United States. They're all all-stars, but there's not a lot of passing the ball. It's usually like, hey, I'm just going to dribble it and take it down myself and steal the moment. And sure, that works in a sporting event when you're trying to, convey athletic prowess, but when you're trying to create emotion, deliver something that is impactful, like what they set up with Rey's storyline, you don't want things stepping on their toes. You want things to complement each other. So it almost gets to a point where just because you have this IP that has this fan base, we shouldn't forgive it for the fact that what they even gave us as a strong start quickly just comes into a contest for attention.
That's where I'm going to disagree with you.
Well, because let me interject here, gentlemen. This is a point that you guys both brought up. Now, Don, you said that they played on, kind of the originality of A New Hope, right?
Yes.
It was somewhat of a safe bet in terms of the nostalgia and, the overall format, right? Why try to fix something that's broken? Now, Chris, on the other hand, what your point was that they almost were afraid to take risks and they played it safe in hopes that, no one would almost notice that this was almost frame for frame the exact same movie. So now let me bounce this question off of you guys. Why do you think they took the route that they did in terms of playing it very safe and the again very copied storyline of A New Hope? Why do you think they did?
They were chasing the dollar sign. They have so much money that they need to recoup, and this is a part of business, and I don't want to make it too business oriented, but like, for example, someone who's been on record labels, for every one band that takes off on a record label, there's 20 failures. You need to make that money back, right? How many movies has Disney put out and like we've forgotten about? There's a few. And in recent years, like, Onward, for example, didn't quite do what they had wanted to do. That was something they shelled out money for. They got the big names, Chris Pratt, Tom Holland, right? And it did fine, but it wasn't the smash hit they wanted. So they have to make up for all those movies. So they saw the golden cow, the cash cow, if you will. And instead of doing something original and pushing it forward, they chose what I think is the quick dollar in the moment. But in the long run, I actually think it's going to keep people out of the seats. Whereas if they would have done something bold and daring with these very interesting characters, in the long run, sure, it might not have been as big of a smash hit out of the gates, but I think they cheated themselves in hindsight.
I have so many points to dispute that fact. Number one, The Force Awakens obviously being mimicked of A New Hope is the word that I was looking for. There's like a multitude of different reasons that don't just have to do with money. It was the fact that they were going to go with original script by Michael Arndt, and the fact that they ended up not being able to come to a cohesive script idea ended up causing them to go back to Lawrence Kasdan, who co-wrote the script with J.J. Abrams, who was primarily overseeing it. But the other thing that I wanted to come to is Onward wasn't a box office failure because of it didn't do what they needed to do. Onward was a box office failure because it came out a week before the pandemic hit. So they kind of had to drop that on Disney Plus in order to cut their losses. And real quick, I just wanted to bring it back to some of the points that you were making about the characters as far as that goes, because some things that you were saying were just like wrong. It is Rey's story, first and foremost. I actually think that the movie does a supremely good job of balancing out the characters as far as focusing you on like which character has the ample amount of screen time and how they're kind of all going to play into each other. Definitely. I think that, again, this is one of the first points where I'll give it. I actually think they played it different from A New Hope, which I think was really interesting, because the whole thing about A New Hope is that A New Hope obviously starts on Tantive 4 and you're thrown directly into the action with this one character who you then leave for a little bit when you're introduced as you're following these two like kind of sidekick characters. Even before we're introduced to your main character, Luke Skywalker isn't introduced until like, I want to hesitate, like 20 minutes into the movie, which is like crazy to think of, because usually you're always introduced immediately to your lead character.
It's the map that is
right. So that brings me to my Force Awakens point, which is that Force Awakens starts off again with another character who's not the main character, who's Poe Dameron, who is clearly the man on the mission. Again, setting up this idea that, again, as opposed to A New Hope, which was introducing you to this galaxy that you've never been to before, Force Awakens was kind of reintroducing you and showing you, hey, okay, this is a setting that you may be familiar with, but these are new characters and you have a whole new plot that is playing off of elements that you knew before, which is that, hey, Luke Skywalker is now missing and now we're trying to find him. You know, again, taking aside what I believe you are perceiving as problems for the entirety of the new trilogy, that for some reason you're focusing on this one movie alone, focusing on this.
No, I would say you don't need to put those words in my mouth. I'm talking about Force Awakens and Force Awakens.
But what I'm saying is that the movie does.
Well, you were saying what I was saying. Let's only focus on what we think. You know what I mean?
So the movie does have a directive flow, I think. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It has a like very clear setup. We need to find Luke Skywalker, and it has a very clear ending. Okay, we found Luke Skywalker. That's literally screenwriting 2.0 or 1.0, whichever one you want to go with. You know, it just so happens that
2.0, but yeah,
the actual plot point has to go from certain characters until it reaches our main character, who in this case is Rey. But also, then you have the ancillary introduction of Finn. And this is, again, another element where Force Awakens actually differs from A New Hope. Because A New Hope, once you pretty much got to Luke, you were pretty much with Luke, and then you kind of like met the other characters. Like from there, you met Obi-Wan, and then from there, you met Han Solo, and you kind of like were introduced to each of these characters that would play a part. Force Awakens does that. It just does that a little bit differently, and I think it does it in kind of a more interesting way. Because again, the goal of The Force Awakens is not to introduce you, it's to reintroduce you to something. And again, this is actually a point where I think this plays in the movie's favor, because as opposed to showing you something completely new, I think it actually does something really, really interesting in the sense of it shows you something that is sort of new while at the same time feeling really familiar. So what I like is that you're introduced kind of to these character archetypes, for lack of a better word. You see, you know, the smuggler type with Poe. You see the desert scavenger with Rey. You see the masked force using villain with Kylo Ren. And these characters all seem like archetypes. But again, what the movie does is plays these characters against their expectations, because again, unlike what you said, Chris, and this is actually what you said, they're not copy and paste archetypes. As funny as that point was, Kylo Ren was not listening to My Chemical Romance tapes, although that'd be amazing to think of him just listening to those. And no, these are actually different types of characters in the sense of they're kind of more, I guess for lack of a better word, like what it would be like if like certain characters ended up growing up hearing the legends of these characters. You know, similar to the way that The Sopranos was a show kind of about the first generation of men growing up watching The Godfather. I kind of view these characters as that, you know, where you have Kylo Ren, who is very clearly supposed to be like trying to emulate Vader, but not doing a good job of it. And you have Rey, who again is a desert scavenger, but unlike Luke, literally seems to be stranded there with no one. And unlike Luke, has had to like fend for herself and hasn't kind of like been provided everything. And arguably, could she actually have a destiny that influences the rest of the galaxy? Previous experience tells us yes, but at the moment, you didn't necessarily know that. And then you have Finn, who to me is the most interesting new installment in that movie, where you have something that, for the most part, the movies have never done before, which is the idea of kind of just a soldier rebelling against the common cause, you know, against the overall general cause, which to that point was something that had never been seen in Star Wars movies before. So you want to talk about like cohesive plot and everything. I don't think you could get more cohesive if you tried, just as far as, okay, you have these characters that I think are all amazingly well established. You set them each on their respective goals, and at the end of the movie, they finish their goals. So as far as that goes, I think the movie's actually pretty cohesive.
Yeah, sure. We know it's cohesive because A New Hope worked. But so here's what I'll say, all right? I'll sort of further elaborate on my arguments here. To me, it seems like what you're saying, and again, I'm not saying this is what you said. I'm saying this is what it feels like you're saying. is that you're doing more work for the creators. You're justifying their lack of attention to detail. You sort of explaining the meanings behind the characters and the reasons they appear and the reasons they do things just weren't
the creators
conveyed in
had
the
to have
film.
come up with them for the characters to work. They wouldn't have worked if the creators didn't actually put the thought into them.
Right, but listen, here's what I was trying to say in regards to my joke about Kylo Ren listening to My Chemical Romance. This movie is not supposed to feel like it was made in 2020, whereas I feel about A New Hope, it feels like it's timeless. It's not a piece of the 70s, and sure, it is visually and cinematically and effects wise, but the writing doesn't make me think, oh, okay, that was like a very 1978 or whatever year it came out phrase, lingo, movie beat. It just feels like a galaxy far, far away. I don't feel like I'm watching a movie that was, having these little, tinges of pop culture infused into it. Kylo Ren with the haircut, for example, him being so moody, him, really having this like deep internal struggle is something that I think you've seen a lot of in regards to like pop culture, people starting to wear all black in the music scene, people being broody, people thinking it's okay to lash out and act out and stuff. It feels very trendy, and it doesn't feel genuine to a Star Wars character, especially a character with all that power and all of that, fight inside of him. I just think the way that they did it was very 2020, especially when and this is an interaction with Kylo Ren. Unfortunately, Poe Dameron, who I was really going to love until this stupid line happens where the bullet is held in the air by Kylo Ren and Poe goes, "Do you speak first? Do I speak first?" That would never happen in the 1978 A New Hope, because they weren't trying to make it feel like it came out in 2020. It was just someone's pure creative vision that they were conveying in a film. So it's like all of these characters don't feel like actual people who could exist in Star Wars. Instead, they feel like a new team of people taking an old IP and saying, hey, how can we sell something in 2020 that is old? And it seems like they're trying to, like, for example, remember that show Pimp My Ride? Like, pimp out an old car and make it flashy and new because it's old and therefore it can't be good. So if we just rely on all the old tropes, then it can't be good. And that's confusing to me, how they developed the characters like that, because they took zero risks when it came to the structure of the story. So it's like they're fighting themselves, and therefore it makes it very easy for me to debunk all the creative decisions, because they couldn't even figure out the message they wanted to convey. They have all these characters who are clear archetypes of the past, 10, 15 years of pop culture, yet they were so passionate about coming up with these like new approaches, but they couldn't really write because they wasted all their time on these silly little tropes and these silly little jokes that they said, oh, well, we actually need to have like a story that progresses. That first Star Wars film, that was a good one. You remember A New Hope. And it's just, it just feels like they didn't know what they were doing. And the more and more I watch this film, the sadder I become, because it's just such a fall from grace. And the fact that it's connected to the Skywalker trilogy, especially, I think it taints Luke. I think it taints Leia. I think it taints Han Solo. And I think that these guys are just stunt doubles at best of their, original better selves.
Oh, you're
Chris, that was really interesting that you bring up in terms of the characters and the archetypes that, developed even over just the first film. Now, I'd love to hear you, and I'm trying to stay away from as much as non-canon information as possible. But in terms of to support kind of, the argument that you guys are having right now, why do you feel that they only took bits and pieces that made some of the, the great characters that we only saw a shadow of in, The Force Awakens? For example, Kylo Ren, being a mirage, if you will, of Jason Solo. Do you again feel that it was more so them not wanting to take those risks, or why do you feel that they again, took bits and pieces of stuff that was pretty well received by fans worldwide?
Okay, I guess I'll just go. I think it's because they, like I said, they mismanaged their time. It's a corporation with billions of dollars, yet they were so invested in the visual appearance of Kylo Ren. Can we sell him to what the kids look like nowadays? Can we make him look as close to Post Malone as possible so that his action figures will fly off the shelves? That they failed to have an actual story that could push him forward. To me, it seems like it was marketing first, screenwriting, and passion for carrying one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sci-fi trilogy of all time forward in a positive light. So the money machine.
I'm pretty sure it's sci-fi fantasy, but I sort of do have an answer for that as far as not referring to the extended canon. It's simply because Disney didn't give a shit. They never gave a shit. In a press interview that Bob Iger stated that Iger had when being questioned about the unreleased Duel of the Fates, or the now released Duel of the Fates script that Colin Trevorrow was going to write and direct, he said that there was a whole segment in there that referred back to an arc that occurred in the Clone Wars, and he wanted them to get away from that because he felt like regular people wouldn't understand it enough. But again, that's the Disney side of things. Just going back to The Force Awakens, and again, I feel, and this is not me putting words in your mouth, but I feel that you are attributing all of your problems that you have with just the overall money-making agenda of Disney, and you're kind of placing them unfairly on this movie. They've been conceived of. Yeah, they didn't really, again, how many times have we famously stated, J.J. Abrams, and again, this is fault on Disney, not on the movie itself, but on Disney, that they had set these archetypes up and they had nowhere for them to go. I will fully be the first person to admit that in the later movies, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker showed that they had no plan, no idea for an overall conception for an arc for the rest of these characters. But that doesn't apply to this movie. And as far as setting these characters up, if you look at, again, the role of the trilogy, first movie, first act, second movie, second act, third movie, third act resolution, these characters, I think, are all really, really well set up. And as far as kind of the whole conception of Kylo Ren and everything, just going specifically based off that, he's supposed to emulate Vader, but at the same time, he's not supposed to feel that way. And I'm a little bit confused as far as your conundrum goes with being like, okay, so one minute you're saying that this movie is ripping off A New Hope, but then the next minute you're saying that they're trying to make it with new characters that feel kind of like center focused towards a modern day audience. That confuses me a little bit, because it's like you can't really have it both ways, but also
sure you can, and here's why. So basically, they spent so much time trying to make these characters sellable. Put Kylo Ren in skinny jeans, right? Make Rey have this bun that's super trendy that all the girls have nowadays. They spent so much time on the visual appearance and actual, fashion sense of the characters that they had no choice when it was time to show Disney a movie, and however much their timeline was after they spent all this time just, painting BB-8 and whatnot, that they had to do something, right? We needed a movie. So they said, oh, shoot, what can we do? Well, New Hope worked, right? It started off the greatest trilogy of all time. Let's just drag and drop it into there. So I think it was by necessity, because there was lack thereof a creative vision after they spent all this time on the BS marketing and trendy. Because if you look at these characters, dude, they are pop culture icons. If they were walking a red carpet, they would literally just fit right in with DiCaprio and Brad Pitt and all these other people.
Stars are supposed to.
But I'm talking about like Luke. He didn't look like he was trying to chase the latest fashion trends. He just looked like a kid on Tatooine who was a moisture farmer who wanted a better life for himself.
It was the 70s, and just whole marketing around movies was different. And again, if we're taking movies for the time that they are released, that was the time that it was released in. It was 2015. Movie marketing was a thing. Research group and focus groups have been a thing for years now. So as far as just kind of like using that as a weapon against a movie, that's a weapon that you could use against literally any blockbuster that came out in the last like 10 years alone. Forget that movie specifically. Again, it's just part of like, I feel like this overall just vendetta against the blockbusters and corporations, which again, I'm still really confused at, but whatever. That's a thing that we do. My
argument's pretty cut and dry. I don't see the confusion there.
But my whole thing with the movie is that if we're just taking it from the movie itself, right? Just the movie itself, taking aside all the blockbuster things, it's a sense of where, just from a screenwriting perspective, I think that what they did was actually kind of brilliant. Because again, the whole thing and kind of the whole focus of this movie, and to me, what differentiates it from the original Star Wars, is the fact that you're right. The original Star Wars, they didn't have focus groups. Yes, it was meant to be timeless. Yes, it was the creative vision of one overall person as opposed to the Disneyification of it. Sure, whatever. That's an argument that I will happily endorse because I've stated it multiple times. But again, where I give this movie credit is the fact that, again, all those things to me that you brought up that were problems with the movie, I think are to this movie's strengths. Because certain of the jokes, like at the very least that first, you talk first, I talk first, that wasn't necessary. That kind of almost felt like, in a weird way, something that like if Han Solo were alive today, he would say. Like, I definitely, like, just as far as that goes.
No,
and I
not at all. Han Solo doesn't. Han Solo
that's what I'm saying. That is a subjective argument.
Moments like that.
You. That is a subjective argument. That is a subjective argument from you. I personally do not feel that. You are stating that because you specifically feel that way, but that you can't make an overall generalized statement like that towards the overall Star Wars verse. That's not how it works. You're not George Lucas, and you're not the overall creators that did that, right? Whatever the case was, that was a creative choice. Probably that Oscar Isaac probably improv'd in the moment, and it's whatever. And you could like it or you could not. I personally did. The BB-8 thing aside, as far as how this movie goes with treating its characters, I think how this gets the extra miles is the fact that these characters essentially are us, which to me is what brings it back to originally what Star Wars is about, which is about the little guy. I've said this numerous times in my arguments against the prequels, and kind of to me why the prequels don't overall work as movies, even if they have some interesting ideas about them, is the fact that the prequels, for lack of a better word, became the Jesus story, but with a lot more pretentious and kind of a lot more weirdo and about like the upper politician. And I felt like there were a lot of good ideas that kind of just got getting lost in the shuffle. This movie, however, kind of brought it back to the idea of it being about the little man, the regular guy that could just get involved in this galaxy-wide crisis and actually be able to make a difference. You know, that's what made Luke Skywalker a compelling character. It's what got us through the whole original trilogy, and it was really interesting to watch him learn and grow and become the Jedi Master that he was in Return of the Jedi. But what's interesting about all of these new characters that you bring in here is that all of these new characters are essentially us. And the way that they kind of treat the new characters as kind of these audience-esque avatars, kind of having them react to these idols that they come in. And also, I think you are inherently wrong about how this movie uses Han Solo specifically. Again, certain things that happen in the later movies, that's one thing, because again, that was probably the one that they did have planned out, was that each movie would focus on one member of the original trilogy. Force Awakens obviously being Han, Last Jedi being Luke, and Rise of Skywalker being Leia, or what was originally supposed to be Duel of the Fates. Obviously, circumstances just happen in real life that they just couldn't account for. That's one thing. But as far as how they utilize Han Solo, kind of having him be like, take over the Obi-Wan Kenobi part and have like be their guide into this new world. Again, as far as that being derivative, that's derivative of storytelling itself. Star Wars is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Here, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is going to have like an old mentor figure. So again, that's an argument that, again, you want to take a shot as how that ripped off Star Wars, go right ahead. But it ripped off but Star Wars was ripping off a whole lot of other movies before it even came out. Again, it's just the idea of kind of the internet reaction and the fact that it makes everything seem so immediate. When at the time, if you think about it, Star Wars, the original Star Wars specifically, is not using any new storytelling devices that we haven't necessarily not seen before. Again, one of the biggest kind of like subtle jokes within the film Twitter community is the fact that it's well known that George Lucas ripped off multiple elements from Akira Kurosawa, specifically Throne of Blood. Like, I watched Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, and I was like, wow, this is almost beat for beat Star Wars. It's kind of insane the way that it starts off and the way that it ends, as far as that whole thing goes. It's kind of funny. So as far as kind of what this movie stands for, kind of in the sense, it's one of the rare instances where, kind of to me, like the first season of Stranger Things, it actually uses the nostalgia well, and nostalgia actually plays itself into the storytelling devices and taking apart the subjective, kind of your subjective take on the overall very clear capitalist and corporation involvement, which again is an unfortunate part of the movie making process in general. So again, once again, I refer you to my previous point that if you're going to take shots at Disney, take shots at every single movie franchise, kind of blockbuster franchise, kind of how they play it safe. I can give you numerous different examples as far as that goes. And I think that Force Awakens was, to me, what should have been the kickoff of like this awesome new decade of kind of these really interesting new and different stories. And the problem is what came after it was just all of these really derivative, annoyingly basic movies that kind of felt like they were playing it more and more safe. But as far as this movie goes, I think this movie was kind of the only one of those movies that actually got it right as far as that goes.
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously you raise points that I think anyone with a brain would agree with, but there are some things where I disagree with you on, and we're not speaking about other blockbusters. So, I mean, I think anyone with eyeballs can see the same sort of, arguments applied to Jurassic
Again,
Park.
You give a lot of credit to regular people. I'm just saying.
Well, I speak to regular people, I live outside of the cinephile bubble, and I speak to musicians, I speak to my classmates, I speak to my family members. To be a good critic, I think you can't just live in a bubble. I think to be a good journalist, I think that's a big problem that we see with mainstream media right now, right? All the journalists only follow each other on Twitter. Therefore, when someone says something about Orange Man, they all say the same thing, and then they don't fact check it, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. But the fact that it is sometimes wrong is because of their intrinsic bias, where they only live in their bubble. We're not talking about other movies, though. We're not talking about other blockbusters right now. We're just talking about this new Star Wars trilogy that just concluded, and more importantly, Force Awakens. So, yeah, I kind of want to tackle the thing you were saying about the nostalgia factor and how they brought in the old characters, and each movie was, the Solo movie, the Leia movie, the Luke movie. And they obviously were intercut in between all of them, but clearly Han Solo was the torchbearer of nostalgia in the first film, the mentor, but he wasn't written the way that I watched Han Solo growing up as a kid. It's one thing to change the tone of Star Wars. and interject these jokes that you can sort of peg similar moments in Zootopia or similar moments in a Marvel film, cutting intense combat or intense action with a quick joke, because things can't be too scary anymore. God forbid we leave an impression on people. But I digress. But Han Solo didn't feel like Han Solo. Not because of him being limited as an actor, and not because of him being limited as his age. I actually thought, Harrison Ford, God bless him, he had a little fight in him, a little spunk in him. I wouldn't be able to do that at his age. That's all I'm going to say right now. And but he just, he felt Disneyified. It really felt like,
I really want to know
where was JJ on this thing? And so if you're asking what that means, what it means is that, Han Solo was, for better or for worse, he was sure of himself, and he was always looking for a way out of the problem. Sometimes it meant getting in more debt with Jabba, or it meant, driving down the wrong crater hole and having to turn a Millennium Falcon around. Like, he wasn't always perfect, but he was never passive. And so for them to just come in
this,
and yeah, he was. For them to just come in and have him hand over the Millennium Falcon, I don't care that it was the classic, passing of the torch moment, giving Rey the ship and whatnot. Like, it was just having her be the co-pilot. It's like he just seemed to always need help. He just seems so feeble, and he seems so old. And in his dialogue and in his story beats, he just didn't have that fight, that gunslinger, smuggler passion. He just felt safe. He felt very PC, very, I can't say the wrong thing because now we're owned by Disney, and if I say the wrong thing, then we might get canceled.
And Star Wars.
Yeah, but he still had guts back in the day. When he's at that scene in the bar the first time and Greedo comes up to him.
I agree.
And he didn't have that in this film. He felt feeble. He felt brittle. And sure, he's older, so of course there is that. But I think someone who has done as much as he did for the galaxy to just sort of turn into a wimp like he did, it just really, to me, felt like that's one of the many examples of how the people didn't understand the source material they were writing for, clearly. And I think it shows with Han Solo. You can transfer that argument into Leia, and you can certainly transfer that argument into the cowardice of Luke Skywalker.
See, that's where I'm going to fight you, because I think the Luke Skywalker thing might be the most brilliant thing that they did in this new trilogy. But as far as Han goes, yeah, he's old. And as far as just breaking down the specifics go, he didn't really hand over the Falcon to Rey. Not at all. She was just kind of there in the moment, helping him as a spur of the moment as they were trying to escape. And then, yeah, she got it because he died. So it was kind of just a spur on the moment, and then she just ended up taking off with Chewbacca at the end to go and find Luke. So as far as that whole goes, like, I'm a little bit confused as to how that argument goes. But as far as everything else goes, like, Han Solo was still very, very much Han Solo. He was still kind of like quick on his feet. He wasn't necessarily, I mean, yeah, he was older, so obviously he couldn't do everything that he did in the original, but like, I still think that he was like, what's it called? Take charge, take no prisoners. I absolutely believe that that's the same Han Solo that was in the bar in the original, as far as being the whole, shoot first, ask questions later, to the point where they literally even make a joke about the fact that they dumped Captain Phasma in the trash compactor intentionally. Like, how come nobody talks about that in this new Disney movie? Like, that kind of seems to have like gone well away. They kind of just like made a joke about kind of casually just like dropping someone into a pit with a giant murdering, for all they know, murdering monster. So as far as kind of the guts and the bravado goes, and as far as the actual like grit, like, what were you expecting? Like, were you expecting like a Deadpool, like, or a Logan, like slicing people's heads off? Like, that's not what this type of movie is. I was
expecting the character I grew up watching.
Well, I think that's inherently because this is an argument that I've actually applied to a couple of different things right now. I think I've seen similar problems that people have both with Luke in The Last Jedi and also the future characters in in Legend of Korra, which is that, yeah, the characters that you knew growing up are not going to be the same. They're going to grow and change over time. And I think the fact that these characters are not the same that you knew growing up, but if anything, it kind of shows them having more room to grow and showing that, oh, these still can be dynamic and interesting characters because they weren't all the same. Because guess what? I don't want to see the same Han Solo that I saw back in A New Hope, because that would be boring. And it would show that he didn't learn anything. And if anything, kind of seeing this like older, more broken down Han who like kind of resorted back to his old ways, even though he was like one of the heroes of the galaxy, I'm like, whoa, okay, that's interesting. I want to know what happened. Again, that's an argument that I will attribute to future movies as far as not really explaining that. But as far as for that movie, that setup went, I was like, okay, I'm on board again. Han Solo is still a badass, and he's still like a really, really awesome character.
So, guys, so one of our viewers, he actually just wrote to me, and was kind of, I guess, in conjunction with Chris's point. Now, Chris, to kind of recap, you felt that the research that they gave overall, kind of the test research for Force Awakens was they relied too much on, again, their nostalgia factor, and that their demographics, were almost wrong in the sense that the traditional person would have loved, a fresh take on it while maintaining some of the original principles that made these characters lovable on screen.
Yeah, I mean, dude, the Force comes with a set of rules, right? You can't change too much, but what you can do is use the galaxy. We were stuck in the same exact drag and drop formula. Start on a desert planet, quickly get swept up into an intergalactic conquest that's beyond our comprehension, choose a side, go through the ropes, blow up a ship. It's just, I'm sick of seeing that, man. We have all of this territory to explore. And so all the faults that I have for The Mandalorian, and that could be a different debate, at least it does that right. At least it makes it feel like a galaxy far, far away. And just real quick to Dom's point about sort of Han Solo having character development, I think seeing him move slower and, be more open-minded doesn't mean that he progressed and grew. I just think it's like, oh, cool. He's literally here just to put butts in seats. We got him in the trailer. We got Harrison Ford. Okay, we might see some ROI on this one. And we can keep beating that dead horse. We don't need to. I just kind of wanted to get a little final rebuttal in there. But yeah, Ian, to sort of what you just brought up, it's like, okay, so there's a little trash compactor monster. At first it was charming. At first it was cute. But then when you just kept seeing the same progression, I was like, oh, okay, so now this is the little robot that cuts the, intensity of the moment with a little beep boop or a little lighter flick in this situation. Oh, okay. So now this is like the new rebel base. It's not snowy now. It's in like a forest. It's like, okay. So.
All right. Well, so I do have one final point for our round two here, gentlemen. I want to say that you both have brought up some very interesting points. You both are very well, and it's been great listening to both of your points. The last point I'd like to touch on here is actually one that one of our commenters brought up, was in terms of our man J.J. Abrams. Now, a lot of people, I guess you could say, either went one way or the other, where you loved his new kind of Star Trek take, and this is that. Let's touch on your guys' opinions on, the overall direction of the film in terms of specifically J.J. Abrams.
I can go quick on this one because my thoughts on him are pretty standard. I think JJ is a capable director when he's working with people who know how to work with him. I think the idea of kind of entrusting JJ to kick off something and then see it all the way through is a mistake, because he's proven time and time again he is not that guy. He is the guy who goes in, starts something, and then leaves quickly. Again, he directed the pilot of Lost. He was gone. I'm surprised that he directed 2 Star Trek movies. That's already way more than anyone that would give him credit for. And I guess, again, that's kind of like why I was a little bit worried when I saw that he was coming back to direct Rise of Skywalker. For that movie, I was like, oh, wow, now they're just really trying to capitalize on everything they did in Force Awakens. But I think that for as far as just his direction with this movie goes, I think it might be the best thing he's ever done as far as everything goes. You could just tell that he is a guy who understands what it is that he's doing as far as that. And Chris, I know, was going to bring up the idea of, because he's directing A New Hope. Whatever. He's pulling from A New Hope, sure. But he brings this, I don't know what it is about it, because it's really tricky kind of to describe his style, but kind of the lens flare-esque angle, kind of the mixing of new cinematography with kind of like traditional old school backdrops and everything. Again, at least for that movie, he really did, I think, a very superb job of mixing kind of the old with the new as far as that goes. And again, when you want somebody to set up some really awesome mysteries that you're going to see followed through, you don't go to anybody else other than J.J. Abrams, because again, I think the idea, and the problem is we still haven't seen this, because again, Disney bucked on their own what they told us they were going to do, is trying to see somebody else come in there and try to figure out some of the mysteries that JJ sets up. In a weird way, that's almost what happened with the Cloverfield franchise, but that's a whole different thing as far as that goes. Again, so my take on it overall is just the fact that JJ is a guy who, at this point, people should really know what they get when they get it from him.
Yeah, I don't think that excuses the lack of care and effort that he puts into his projects, though. I mean, my relationship with J.J. Abrams has been a rocky road. I went from being super inspired from him to wanting to sign up to film school because of him, to sort of getting into film school and realizing how little he actually brings to the table in regards to style, in regards to just like sort of leaving a touch that's notable, a mark that you can, you know, there isn't like the mark of how Tarantino or Scorsese, you know, for me, Scorsese has this elegant dialogue that they can sit at a restaurant table and smoke cigarettes for 20 minutes and it doesn't matter because you're just so engulfed in that moment, right? Tarantino, obviously his style goes without saying. I mean, no one can write a script like him. Where is that with JJ? You know, he starts these projects in regards to television that get you interested, Lost being the biggest letdown of my life as I've done this show and sort of grown to still love it, but also understand that I hate it at the same time. It's an ongoing dialogue that keeps going in my mind.
You finally have been turned.
Well, I think to be a critic, you can't be blind to that fact. You can still love things for silly reasons, right? We're people. But I think if we're going to be analytical, you have to sort of put that aside, you know? And so with Star Wars, it was really upsetting because J.J. Abrams literally was in a Star Wars fan club that was super exclusive to get into as a little kid. It's the reason why he wanted to create movies, get into this whole medium. Sure, his parents worked in Hollywood. He had a bit of a head start, but whatever, that doesn't matter because he still did it, right? He still got to direct a Star Wars film. And so where was that? You know, where was that? I love this galaxy. I always spoke about wanting to see more of this galaxy, but instead we're just going to do the same exact thing. And I would love for there to be like a true documentary about how much Disney actually impacted this thing. But if we're just going to talk about JJ, right, I don't really see any stylistic touches of his. Instead, all I really see is just how can I fit this IP, because he usually directs IPs, honestly, except for Super 8. That's a bit of an anomaly. But still, that's just like 80s trope after 80s trope. So, I mean, is there really something original there?
Stranger Things,
but it's like
Stranger Things was a thing.
Exactly. And it's like, how can I put 2020 into this old IP because they hired me to sell tickets and I don't really care about leaving an artistic mark. And it's just upsetting because the guy could be so inspiring if he wanted to. He's produced, he's directed, he's written, he's even scored some of his own, you know, projects. That's incredible. Who's that multifaceted? And what does he do with it? He gives you this regurgitated nonsense that you see in Zootopia, you see story beats in Marvel just like this. And it's like, I'm done, you know, sort of drinking the J.J. Abrams Kool-Aid. Like, I've woken up. I get it now, and I've awoken, and I'm not happy with
taking the red pill, finally.
So it sounds like...
I'm not going to say I took the red pill on the internet. That'll
open up a
proverbial red pill.
Bunch of different Reddit subreddits.
Sorry, Ian, we just had to clear that up before our video gets flagged.
So it sounds like you almost had this, you know, hope that he was going to kind of elevate himself to the level that we now see individuals such as Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni in terms of their handling and their professionalism, for lack of a better word, with the franchise. That if I'm not hearing it correctly, you know, please correct me here.
I think the passion and, well, you know what? Let me run that back. J.J. Abrams, I think, is passionate about a dollar sign. I think Favreau and Filoni are passionate about creating interesting stories that are both new and also play into the universe, the rules that already exist. I wish that he had that mentality where he's not just trying to service the execs, he's also trying to service the story and this amazingly, you know, people love Star Wars, dude. We're all wearing Star Wars t-shirts here, right? Like I used to live, eat, and breathe only this until Dom thankfully showed me, hey, other movies are pretty good too. That's an exaggeration, but I was pretty much a one-note Star Wars guy for a long time because it is that engulfing.
You were one note on other things too. You were pretty one note on DC at the time. You were still anti-Marvel.
Oh, well, that's rightfully so. It's a drag and drop template.
So, Dom,
yeah.
So basically, do you have any final remarks before we kind of move into...
Before we kind of move into round 3? Yeah, again, all I'm going to say is this, that I think that Chris has largely been marred, and rightfully so, by the Disney kind of screwing around of us, the fans, and just the overall general franchise. And again, I'm sad. I'm sad that he was hurt by this movie. I really, really am. I wish that there was a way that I could help fix him and help him get over it. But the sad truth is, I get it. It's just completely broken. And I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do to help. But yeah, I still stand by it. Force Awakens, I think, has a lot of interesting things and a lot of things to add to the Star Wars saga overall. And I think just overlooking it is as just a simple cash grab is a mistake. Say what you will about JJ as far as that goes, but.
All right. Well, fantastic, gentlemen. Again, great round 2. I've taken into account everything that you've said. The special points that you guys have made in terms of how you really personally feel, and especially bringing your own personal trauma or PTSD in Chris's experience, if you will. So it was a very interesting round.
Chris just needs to go to like a marriage counseling or something like that with this movie. That's what it sounds like.
So viewers, we thank you for sticking in here. We're moving into round 3. This is our final round. This is our decisive round. Again, any last points or remarks that these two gentlemen feel is noteworthy for our viewers at home? Anything that will help them sleep tonight a little better, knowing that they had their opportunity and capitalized on that. Considering that Dom, I believe you started first.
Yep, I did. So Chris is going with the closing argument.
All right, Chris, you have the floor, my good sir.
Yeah. In conclusion, it's pretty much all of what I've just said, but I think bringing it into JJ at the end there, I just don't think that it's only his fault, though. I don't want people to leave here thinking that, oh, Chris is just mad at Disney and Chris is just mad at marketing and Chris is just mad at JJ Abrams. I'm mad at everyone who worked on this thing, because even the actors, because I mean, guys, the writing was in the boldest font you could have imagined, that this is a New Hope 2.0. Sure, you're not going to turn that down, especially with Star Wars, which I do respect them for notoriously picking no-name talent and helping develop them and offer them careers of a lifetime. You can't fault anyone for taking this job, but I mean, I wouldn't feel proud of it in hindsight. And it kind of seems like Daisy Ridley isn't that proud of it in hindsight. And John Boyega doesn't really seem to be that stoked if you followed what he said about Star Wars, because it's pretty obvious that this is already the movie came out this time last year, if not maybe a few weeks from now, and it's already like the laughing stock of Disney, in the past, 5 years for a reason. It's just, people are waking up to the fact that you guys got to step it up. Marvel Phase 4, they better step it up, because, this could be a whole nother debate, but was Thanos really that impactful? I don't know. I never felt the urgency with him. I just feel like just because something worked in 2010 with the first Iron Man, and you have these story beats that work, just to carry it on over and over again, it's just criminal. And I'm glad that people are waking up. I think there's a reason that these films are starting to get laughed at, especially in the Star Wars standpoint, because it's just like everyone a part of it is to blame. We are smarter than this. I think to put a timestamp on a movie that's set in a galaxy far, far away that shouldn't have any touches of Earth 2020, I think that's just super disrespectful to all the hard work that the people who created arguably one of the greatest twists of all time, and Luke, I Am Your Father, that legacy they left, you're just marring it. And it's just, I don't want to make this too long. So I'm not just mad at the marketing. I'm not just mad at JJ. I'm not just mad at the template. I'm also, a little mad at how under a rock we all were. I was a denier for a while. I wanted to believe it was going to get better, and I saw that middle movie and it wasn't that much better, but I still wanted to believe. And it's just like, I'm glad that we're waking up to the machine, in more ways than one. Maybe that's the moral of 2020, locking us into our houses the whole time. But I'll never forget, in the theater, people were laughing when they should have been crying. People were screaming and cheering at the end just because it was over, not because it was a good film.
That's not why they were cheering at the end.
That is just like telling in and of itself. And everyone who saw this movie knows it was a joke. Who saw the entire trilogy knows that it was even more of a joke. And it's just upsetting, and it's disrespectful to the creator, the man, the myth, the legend himself, George Lucas, and to the legacy that they're just completely, destroying.
Well, I'll be sure to give you a big hug, because it sure sounds like you are real upset at this. No, I
am.
I think he needs it, Ian.
Chris, thank you for your last remarks there. Awesome stuff again. Don, we're going to go into you for our last little bit here.
Oh my God, I don't even know how to follow that up. Seriously. Oh man. I mean, I think that we could call this debate Chris's therapy hour, as far as just getting out all of his criticism against a movie that I don't necessarily think deserves it. I still think it's kind of marred Disney in general, which again, all credit towards him. Most of the rest of these movies deserve it. Again, Last Jedi, I will say that was kind of like my awakening as far as like being aware of the machine and being like, oh, okay, so they just have no idea where they're going with this overall. Still a lot of interesting points in that movie because, again, I am able to actually separate the certain elements that I enjoy of these movies from the overall corporatization of it. And that's kind of what I took away from The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens was, again, kind of the last point where you could kind of expect something really cool. It was the last point where you could actually like kind of look forward to a movie and actually be impressed. Because I don't know what Chris's experience were, but my experience when I walked out of this movie was that people were, for the most part, overjoyed. They were happy that Star Wars is back. They got a feeling in the theater that they, quite frankly, hadn't gotten for a long time, since I would venture to say 1983 with the release of Return of the Jedi. Because I can tell you that for the most part, you want to talk about people fooling themselves. Oh man, talk about people coming out at the end of those prequel movies. It was a movie that, again, had a lot riding on it. Probably expectations that were kind of a little bit too large, let's say, for a movie like that to accomplish. And the fact that kind of just it worked in general, I am more than happy with. I think the new characters were great. I think that its contribution to the overall Star Wars mythos, I thought, was an interesting one. I very, very much enjoyed most of the humor, and I enjoyed the directions with which they were going to send the new characters on. As far as the overall corporatization, I'm sorry, it's just elements that we can't control, because movie making at that point was at a very specific point. And I think that, if anything, we started to become more aware of it after this movie. But I think that for this movie's purposes, I think this was at the point where all that stuff kind of just lined up to make kind of, frankly, like, honestly, a perfect movie. I'm going to say it. Yeah, a perfect movie. And Chris wants to strangle me for that, and that's fine because I don't care. Yeah, sure, it had a third Death Star that was a lot bigger and could blow up multiple planets at once instead of just one planet. And I was like, okay, whatever. But the trade-off to that is that we got an amazing lightsaber fight between our two main antagonists, and like a lot of our two main protagonists and antagonists, and like had a lot of actually interesting suspense. And the fact that, kind of just plot twist wise, you were like, oh, okay, so we're already introduced to kind of the successor of the Skywalker saga, but he's already the bad guy. So kind of the fact that we're kind of doing this reverse switch, or sorry, bait and switch, and we reveal that, oh, it's also not the rebel stormtrooper who we kind of set up as possibly being the protagonist. No, it is this desert scavenger who, again, we still know nothing about. And as far as just like, again, generating a mystery, getting people back and invested into the Star Wars saga, kind of giving them something that was familiar, but not familiar all the way. Again, just taking that movie in and of itself, forgetting the rest of the overall corporate nature of it, I think that this movie absolutely succeeded, and I think it absolutely worked. And I think The Force Awakens, again, if you could separate it from all the other nonsense, still does stand up as a movie overall.
Okay, awesome. Well, do we leave this up to our viewers? I mean, do we?
Ooh, I think we got to leave it up to the viewers. Viewers, vote. Who won that? Me or Chris?
Yeah, viewers, please ring in. I know I certainly have my thoughts.
Well, again, yeah, I think you should also give a score too.
Yeah,
right?
Ian, definitely give your overall final thoughts.
I thought it was close. Certainly came down to the wire. It's certainly good points that, I wanted to hear. Again, I had done, 2 rewatches for the movie, made sure that it was fresh in the mind. And I had seen this opening day in theaters and had actually seen it 4 additional times in theaters. So this movie, to me personally, was something that I was very excited for. But in terms of on a professional basis, I would have to give the debate to Chris. I thought, Chris had a few points.
I did not expect that. Damn.
Oh, okay. See, I had a feeling. I'm like,
keep going, Ian. I love to hear it.
I prepped you too well. I prepped you too well.
I thought you had a few points particularly that really drove it home. In terms of, an unbiased kind of, bystander viewer, if you will. Again, I thought, both of you gentlemen had awesome points. You guys touched on nearly every, likable and dislikable thing about the movie, and that's the tricky thing about this movie, is that it's, on such a broad spectrum of, oh, I loved it, I hated it, oh, now it was horrible, and some people truly, kind of stood right in that little middle gray area. So again, I thought you both did very well in terms of touching on the broad spectrum of the many issues that a lot of people in a general audience kind of stance would feel. So, Again, congratulations to you both. I thought you both did very, very well. Chris would take this round, but that doesn't mean, that Chris will take the next one, ladies and gentlemen. So, certainly tune in.
Sure, yeah, and it's also art, so it's super subjective,
Right.
And this is my issue with the Oscars, the clear winners and the losers.
That one. Oh man, that
Grammys.
one. That's an episode that we got to do just in general. It's just like, especially like considering if and when the Academy Awards even happen this year, which who knows with that.
Totally, because I can't. Obviously, this movie isn't all bad. It's just when you have to argue your points, it's hard to agree with some of the points that Dom was making that I did agree with, because you want to win a debate, right?
Yeah,
and I think Dom probably feels the same way. I'm not saying he does feel the same way. I'm just saying I think
don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth. But yeah, I do in a sense feel the same way. Again, it's all about the debate. It's all about the argument first and foremost. And like I said, people, we hope that you enjoyed this, because again, we said that we were going to spill blood here, and I don't know. I think we did. I mean, I've got a little bit of like a bump right here, but I don't think that's from this debate overall.
And kudos to our community and our subscribers for literally showing up for a random unannounced live stream on a Monday night. I mean, thank you guys so much. The support really does mean the world. You guys have been really killing it for us and making all the the late turned in homework assignments, and for Dom, I'm sure lack of sleep worth it. And
so worth it. Well, who needs sleep? Who needs sleep?
When you have a community like this, I don't think you do. And so thank you guys truly from the bottom of our hearts. And Ian, you were an absolute delight. I really appreciate you joining us tonight, man. I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Of course. And but I do want to mention this fact. Now, Dom had originally had me talk about in the intro your guys' second month of Star Wars. Now, from what I've heard, you and Dom have a very big November Star Wars month coming up.
Yeah.
And I know Dom had mentioned a few of the projects to me over the weekend as we were collaborating. But would you guys, maybe mind breaking down, that month for the viewers and, that may not be aware of all the goodies you guys are bringing our way?
If you're asking, Dom, do you have
absolutely? Well, as we said before, we're starting this Friday, October 30th. We're doing a week-by-week recap of The Mandalorian Season 2. They'll be on Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, you can almost guarantee that this guy right here will be back, because once again, Ian, you kicked ass tonight. Like, this is awesome.
I hope so.
And then as far as extra Star Wars content goes, so next week's podcast episode, again, this week kind of substitutes as the podcast episode of the week, because this is going up live and this will continue throughout the week, and the audio will be up on Spotify on Wednesday, same as the rest of our regular podcasts will go. But next week's podcast, myself and Christian Ivanko, that guy right here, the Force Awakens hater right here, will be breaking down all 11 and breaking down and ranking all 11 theatrically released live action Star Wars movies. We're finally going to be doing it. I did a whole summer series ranking Marvel, so now we're finally going to rank Star Wars here on the channel. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Also, the following Monday, in preparation for our Mandalorian Season 2 episode, and also as kind of like a continuation of our Mandalorian Episode 1 of Season 2 recap, we will be doing a tier ranking video around this time that day of all the Mandalorian Season 1 episodes, because Chris, as you and I were going through Season 1, we each had some very interesting and different and unique thoughts, and you certainly surprised me with some of your opinions as time went on. But that's gonna be an interesting tier ranking, and you and AJ had an awesome Lost season tier ranking, and we're gonna do that with each of the episodes of The Mandalorian Season 1. And then the week after that Monday, so the following Monday, I will be doing another top 10 list of top 10 best Star Wars moments. I hope that I'm able to I hope that I'm able to hit what I believe are some of the greatest moments to have ever hit in a galaxy far, far away, both live action and animation. And that's what we've got as far as Star Wars content goes. Again, it's, for lack of a better word, our second May the 4th month, even though it's technically November the 4th. But again, we're kind of going with it. We're going with it, and we're making it work. So
we're making it work. And one last time, I want to thank Neek, Luke, Basic Entertainment, Certain Vids, Jay, Stranger Boy, Jake A, Tyler, and many, many others, to name a few, for hanging out and joining us tonight. The big thing we're going to be doing, guys, coming up is our Friday night live streams in the form of Mandalorian watch-alongs. Head over to YouTube, go to our channel, find this playlist, subscribe to this playlist, turn on that bell on this playlist so you never miss when we go live. That will be every Friday night for the next 8 weeks at 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. We are going to have a bunch of guests. We're going to have a lot of fun. And needless to say, this might be our best series yet because the plan we have for this thing is going to be unlike any other YouTube review show covering this. I promise you that. Dom wrote one hell of a script, and I cannot wait to tackle the Mandalorian in the way that he has set out for us. So
it's going to be rock solid. And the other thing that, of course, I wanted to give a shout out to for us before we actually got off the air is, again, don't forget, this is still the last week of October. This is the last week of our Shocktober event. And people, don't forget that on Saturday, Halloween itself, October 31st at 9:30 p.m. or 9 o'clock p.m. sharp. We will be doing a watch along for the original cult classic, 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween, as our wrap up for our Shocktober event. That's been a lot of fun. Again, we're going to be in costume watching. So anybody who wants to join in, you'll be required to be in costume, and you would better send in pictures of your costume because we're going to be having a costume contest. First place winner prize is a t-shirt, a graphic tee made by our friend of David of Flicks Talk. And second place winner will be a Blu-ray from my own personal collection. So as far as that goes, tune in on Saturday at 9 p.m. It's going to be a blast. And we're hoping to wrap up Shocktober and roll right into the Mandalorian watch along. And yeah, Chris, so unless you have anything else to say, you're muted.
LOL, that's funny. Yeah, I have one more thing if that's all right. I just want to say, as you know, right here on the screen, Talkin TV on YouTube, but we're also on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Radio Public, Google Play. You can take us on the run. Audio format is also something we have, and we'd love for you guys to join us there. We're pushing the 200 subscribers. In 6 months, we broke 100 subs, which to me is very humbling and very breathtaking, and we really appreciate it. Ian, once again, my friend, I hope you will be maybe even the in-house moderator for these debates. I think you did a phenomenal job. Just so you guys know, I just showed up tonight. These two put it together. I think they did an amazing job. If you guys watch the presidential debates, you know Ian was a better moderator than anyone that we got.
For sure. I think that kind of went without saying there.
Hey, those are just messes in general. But tonight I thought this was pretty clean cut, and it was awesome. And guys, I'm really glad we did this. Thank you guys again for being here. And now, Dom, do you have anything to leave the people with here tonight?
Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram at Talkin TV. Follow this guy on Instagram at Mr. Wonderful, ITH.